Hello, and welcome to another semester of Watching Washington. My name is Nolan O'Connell.
And I'm Lily Grove. Here's a look at the big stories of this week. First, the House of Representatives is cutting it close as the September 30th deadline for government funding decisions is only 8 days away. If Congress doesn't come to an agreement before the 30th, we are at risk for a government shutdown. Emily Schmidt explains why this is looking more and more likely with every passing day.
Those watching the House of Representatives for Tuesday's scheduled procedural vote on a spending proposal to fund the government another 30 days watched in vain. House GOP leaders canceled the vote, a sign they don't have the 218 votes needed to pass the bill.
We're running a $2 trillion deficit this year. And will we have a shutdown? Yes, I think we will. I don't think there's any other way to avoid it. So we'll see how it goes.
We're not shutting the government down.
Some swing district Republicans are floating the idea of working with Democrats to force a vote on the floor.
Look, if the clown show of colleagues that refuse to actually govern does not want to pass a CR, I will do everything we need to make sure that a CR passes.
I think the best way to handle anything is you work through this conference and you get the work done, and that's what we're doing.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy didn't directly say what he would think of moderates signing on for bipartisanship. A reality check, it would take at least 7 legislative days to come to a vote, pushing against the September 30th deadline. And any bill passed in the House still faces the Senate.
The House Republican proposal, drafted and put together by the MAGA hard right wing, is slapdash, reckless, and cruel.
Well, I'm not a fan of government shutdowns.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said Tuesday shutdowns don't produce policy change and have always been a political loser for Republicans. A warning of potential backlash for budget hardliners standing their political ground. I'm Emily Schmidt reporting.
We haven't seen much change in the last few days, but hopefully Congress will be able to come to a happy bipartisan decision in the next week to avoid a full government shutdown. We will keep you updated and hopefully have some good news to share with you again next week, just days before the shutdown could occur.
Tensions between India and Canada continue to rise after Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau accused the Indian government of being involved in the June murder of Hardeep Singh in British Columbia. Nijjar was a Sikh separatist who was one of the prominent supporters of the creation of the independent nations, Khalists. This led him to being labeled as a terrorist by the Indian government in 2020. Both nations have responded to Trudeau's accusations. Canada has expelled an Indian diplomat who is described as the head of an Indian intelligence agency in Canada. India responded by expelling a senior Canadian diplomat and accused Canada for interfering in its internal affairs. In addition, on Thursday, September 21st, India announced that they had suspended visa services for Canadian citizens.
There's any country that needs to look at this. I think it is Canada and its growing reputation as a place, as a safe haven for terrorists, for extremists, and for organized crime. And I think that's a country that needs to worry about its international reputation.
Trudeau did say that Canada, quote, is not looking to provoke or cause any problems. Trudeau then called on India to work with Canada and allowed justice to follow its course. However, tensions are still continuing to grow and no final outcome is a good one. Moving over now to the historic auto workers' strike. Last Friday, on September 15th, they failed to reach a deal with auto giants Ford and General Motors. The UAW president, Shawn Fain, said that 80% of the union demands had been left off the table by the Big Three. Ford and GM are resolved to lay off 600 workers and idle 2,000 more in the coming weeks. When asked for a comment, the UAW president, Shawn Fain, redirected attention to the workers fighting on the front lines for this cause. Let's take a look.
It means to have everybody out here. It's all about them. This is who you need to be talking to. Talk to the members. Talk to the workers that are in their buses every day. That's right. Giving up everything, all their time, sacrifice.
The strike continues to this day in Michigan as we see union members in Granite City outside of an American steel plant. With the deal between the two parties so far apart, it is not known how long the strike will continue, or if these workers' voices will be heard.
Migrant crossing along the U.S. southern borders are rising. According to Homeland Security officials, there were more than 8,000 apprehensions on Monday at the U.S. southern border, similar to the number of daily border encounters recorded before the COVID era and before the Title 42 was set in place for border control. Now, with the title expired, the border arrests have decreased dramatically. However, mass migration still continues to increase across the Western Hemisphere. Many officials say this influx is straining federal resources and overwhelming already crowded facilities, most of which are accompanied by families facing even worse challenges. Late last week, a court filing revealed one of those challenges, stating, in rare cases, children were temporarily separated from their parents while in processing as a result of those crowded holding areas. According to the Associated Press, Michigan's Supreme Court made a decision this Wednesday to reject the revival attempts made by prosecutors regarding the Flint water scandal. The decision made by the court in the original 2022 hearing struck down charges against 9 people involved in the scandal. This included former Governor Nick Snyder, who was charged with willful neglect of duty, and 2 others charged with involuntary manslaughter. The court stated that the process was unconstitutional and declared charges as invalid. They were not persuaded that the question presented should be renewed by the court. Since then, state prosecutors have been fighting hard for an appeal to no avail, and this court decision has killed their chances of any justice.
According to CBS News Chicago, Illinois is the first state to abolish cash bail as a pretrial condition. This was part of the SAFE-T Act, released this past Monday. Now, detention decisions will no longer involve putting up money in exchange for release, but will rather focus on the seriousness of the charge against them and whether they are considered a danger to the public or at risk of fleeing prosecution. Not all are fans of this decision. The Illinois Fraternal Order of Police blasted the Illinois Supreme Court, claiming today's ruling is a slap in the face to those who enforce our laws and the people those laws are supposed to protect. However, those in favor argue judges have more discretion in deciding who should be allowed on the street and, given bail, also given those in marginalized communities as an opportunity for bail.
Statue removal is once again up for debate in New York regarding founding father George Washington and Italian explorer Christopher Columbus. A member of the City Council has introduced a bill that mandates art be removed if it depicts a person who owned slaves, benefited from slavery, or committed crimes against indigenous people. The controversial issue was previously discussed back in 2018 during a City Council committee hearing. Council member Sandy Nurse outlined her bill. It would require the city's Public Design Commission to create the plan for removal, as well as a process for determining whether city art should be instead include an explanatory plaque contextualizing the person's legacy.
Contextualizing or mandating the removal of works of art depicting individuals who profited from the slavery of Black people or committed heinous acts against indigenous peoples, we challenge the celebration of those who have perpetuated oppression.
The commission declined to remove other artwork across the city depicting controversial figures, including the statue of Christopher Columbus in Manhattan's Columbus Circle, for what some scholars and indigenous activists say were atrocities committed by Columbus against indigenous people. As for George Washington and his statues in Washington Square Park and in Union Square, the executive director of Harlem Historical Society says owning slaves should not force it to come down. The bill needs to be voted out of the committee before it can be considered by the entire City Council.
President Biden recently negotiated a deal with Iran to return 5 Americans home in exchange for several jailed Iranians and billions of dollars in funds. According to the New York Times, the deal came after 2 years of negotiations, when the U.S. agreed to unfreeze some $6 billion of oil revenue to Iran, to have access to and as well as the dismissal of federal charges against 5 Iranians accused of violating U.S. sanctions. The Americans have returned home as of September 19th.
Very emotional. I can say I probably haven't cried this much since I was a little kid. It was a chance to watch 5 different people interact, 7 people in total, interact in a way that was very amazing. I mean, this is the first time that they've had a chance to talk without being surveilled by the Iranian government in years. So to watch them kind of relax, lighten up, share laughs, and I had a chance to talk with each one individually, and I was really struck by their strength, their resilience, their hopefulness, and their love for their country. They were grateful that they were heading home, they were grateful to see their family members, and they were grateful that the American people came together to bring them home.
U.S. diplomats suggest Americans stay away from traveling to Iran, as there's no promise that any future deals can be made to retrieve any other Americans from prison, even if those Americans haven't committed any crimes or done anything to receive their sentences.
Up next, the U.S. Senate is going business casual.
Plus, Hunter Biden is suing the IRS over the release of his tax returns. Stay with us. More Watching Washington next.
The Center for CSPAN, which is this organization, the CCSC, what we do is we facilitate like a bunch of organizations, different programs for Brian Lamb, which is the founder of CSPAN. Anyone can be part of CCSC, whether it be through our various internships, our competitions, just to be involved, even like our student community meetings that we have every week. Anyone can go, you don't have to be communications or poli-sci. You just meet so many people, the connections you make is kind of crazy, the range that CCSC has. So yeah, it's just provided me so many opportunities to like kind of achieve the goals I have personally and forward to like whatever career paths I choose.
According to NPR News, what started out as a routine band performance at an Alabama high school football game led to the altercation of a police tasing a band director. According to Birmingham Police Department, officers asked the 39-year-old Johnny Mims to stop the performance because they were trying to clear out the stadium. Sims and his ensemble of 145 students were trying to finish the last minute of the song, and Mims told NPR that nothing we were doing at the time would be a danger to the community, the fans, or the school. Everyone was enjoying themselves, and that's the part I'm having a hard time grappling with. Birmingham police stated that they tased Mims once, while Mims states that he was tased 3 times.
And I had students in the stands, and about 130 in the stands. Then I had 15 students on the actual track. And so there's a coordination that must happen between those two entities of the band. And so it's not one of those things you just cut the group off. In our case, because of the size of the band, we had to split the group up. And so part of the band is in front of me, and then the other part of the band is on the floor. And so as I communicated with them, we were at the end of the song. That would be the most appropriate situation to happen because those two groups are not together.
Mims' lawyer called the incident an alarming abuse of power and wants officers involved to be placed on administrative leave until further action is investigated. Mims states that he is still recovering physically and continues to be haunted by the incident, specifically seeing his students scream and cry while he was tased. This story has raised a lot of attention nationally, saying that there is a need for police reform and training and protection of every citizen's rights.
This week, the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer, officially repealed the unofficial dress code on the Senate floor. Many believed this decision was made to accommodate Senator John Fetterman, who is known for frequently wearing a sweatshirt and shorts to work. Fetterman was elected to the Senate in 2023 and did originally conform to the Senate dress code, but upon his return after taking a 2-month leave to be treated for clinical depression, he ditched the dress code and returned to his comfy and casual attire. He has been known for his casual look for years before being elected to the Senate, and even states on his official campaign website that he doesn't look like the typical politician. Republicans have been outraged by this unlifted dress code and complaints about how it is disrespectful to the institution and the people we serve. One Republican senator, Susan Collins, mocked the uplifted dress code by telling reporters that she was planning on wearing a bikini to work. Since the change, 46 Republicans signed a letter to Senator Schumer urging him to reconsider the dress code and to protect the sanctity of the Senate floor. No changes have been made thus far, but we will keep you updated as this debate continues to unfold.
President Biden and many other world leaders met this week in New York City for the United Nations General Assembly. Some highlights from President Biden's address to those in attendance regarded the U.S.'s continuing financial support for Ukraine and encouraging other leaders to take a new approach to global challenges. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also made an address to the General Assembly. He had these compelling words to say.
We must act united to defeat the aggressor and focus all our capabilities and energy on addressing these challenges. For the first time in modern history, we have a real chance to end the aggression on the terms of the nation which was attacked.
On Monday, September 18th, Hunter Biden sued the Internal Revenue Service, claiming that the agents wrongfully shared his personal information. According to AP News, Biden's lawyers argue that the IRS hasn't done enough to halt the airing of his personal information. The lawsuit seeks to force compliance with federal tax and privacy laws and $1,000 for every unauthorized disclosure. Greg Shapley, an IRS supervisory special agent, alleged that the prosecutor overseeing the investigation didn't have full authority to bring charges in other jurisdictions. Shapley's lawyer states that the suit is an intimidation tactic for any current and future whistleblowers. Investigations into Hunter Biden have progressed for years. He was expected to strike a plea deal with prosecutors over the summer with charges of misdemeanors for failing to pay his taxes on time.
On September 20th, Attorney General Merrick Garland squared off against Republican critics on Capitol Hill. Attorney General Garland was brought into the court to discuss details about the criminal investigation into Hunter Biden after his plea deal imploded in July. The current president's son was indicted last week on a connection to a series of gun charges that date back from 2018. The House of Judiciary's committee chairman Jim Jordan refuted that the Department of Justice has improperly handled its investigation on Hunter Biden's felony gun charges.
The fix is in. Even with the face-saving indictment last week of Hunter Biden, everyone knows the fix is in.
I am not the president's lawyer. I will add, I am not Congress's prosecutor.
During the hearing, Attorney General Garland continued to state that he had no interference with the Hunter Biden investigation. Instead, he deferred any questions to his special counsel, David Weiss, who was overseeing the Hunter Biden probe. Garland also stressed that these allegations lead receiving multiple threats to him and his family from the public. However, the political interference accusations are sure to reemerge as the House proceeds with an impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden.
An update to the voter registration process is currently being set in Pennsylvania, an important swing state in the upcoming presidential election. On Tuesday, September 19th, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro announced a decision to implement a new program that would automatically register citizens to vote when getting their driver's licenses. This system is already being observed in 23 other states, according to the National Conference of State Legislators. Citizens who are over 18 years old on the day of the next election and a resident of Pennsylvania at least 30 days before the election qualify for this new program. Let's take a listen to Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro talk about the system and what it means for the state going forward.
I've been very open during my campaign and my time as governor about my belief that we should be an automatic voter registration state. We worked on the process. I'm well within my legal authority, and we put out a process that is secure and safe. It goes through our DMV process, which already includes safeguards to ensure that the person registering to vote is eligible to vote. This is an important way to expand voter participation, which I think in turn strengthens our democracy.
With Pennsylvania being one of the 7 swing states across the country, it will be interesting to see if this program will change voter turnout and make voting easier and more accessible for the presidential election and all future elections.
Up next, we're going to be joined by a state lawmaker to talk about the importance of civic engagement.
The full interview is just ahead on Watching Washington.
At Purdue University, we're not just students, we're future leaders. Join Air Force ROTC to embark on a journey of honor, excellence, and service. Learn, lead, and soar to new heights. It's not just a commitment, it's a calling. Purdue Air Force ROTC, where dreams take flight. Are you ready to rise? I got a switch in my head. I go from living to dead. You got me seeing all red. Now I'm becoming.
I'm happy to have with me here today Indiana State Representative Chris Campbell to discuss the topic of civic engagement, voting, and her plans for the upcoming session of the Indiana General Assembly. Thank you for being here, Representative Campbell.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Great. So we're going to jump in right into the first question. In your opinion, how has civic engagement changed among college students during your 5 years in office?
I think it tends to vary. I think when I first came to office was during the election of 2018. There was a lot of activity and a lot of engagement. I think since then it's kind of trailed off a little bit. So.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. I definitely can see that being an issue for sure. So as a representative of Purdue's campus, which you have been so present on our, as a part of our school, for the conversations that you've had with Purdue students, what do you feel are some of the biggest issues or concerns that students have and stuff that we're most passionate about here?
Well, I think some of the things that are students are most concerned about are housing issues. Certainly we've seen a lot of issues in our community with lack of available, affordable housing, and also safe housing has been an enormous issue. Another thing would probably be just affordability. I think Purdue has done a great job at just maintaining the tuition, but college is always going to be expensive. And I think with the competition, again, going back to housing, the housing prices for rentals has just skyrocketed. That makes it less affordable to be in the area.
Yeah, I will say from personal experience, trying to find a house for next year has definitely been a challenge. There's definitely a shortage of housing around the area, so it's definitely a big topic of your conversation right now.
Yeah.
But moving on, what do you think that students are passionate enough to vote in elections, whether they're small or big, like the presidential election?
I think the presidential elections kind of suck all the air out of the room, and people think that those are the most important elections, but they really need to take into account that the government that affects you the most are those in your backyard. And you know, we do have a municipal election coming up in November. There are 2 districts that are basically only students that live in those 2 districts, and there are Purdue students that are running for those districts, yet we see very low turnout. There may be 100 or 200 voters in what represents 7,000 voters. So it's really important that students are registered to vote, engaged, and find out who those candidates are and how they're going to be representing them at that local level.
Right. Yeah, that was actually something that we wanted to talk about today. Is the municipal election is coming up soon, and it includes obviously the city of West Lafayette, and a few other neighboring cities. What do you have to say about that? What can you tell students, like why they should vote, what they should be looking for on that ballot, and what was the reason to get out there?
Well, exactly those reasons that I mentioned. Yeah. Housing is definitely an enormous issue for our community. With the increase of enrollment and the lack of ability to keep up with the housing demand, not only is there a lack of housing, but that has also created competition for that housing and really increased the prices of the housing. But you also have to think about things like, you know, the ability to ride the bus for free. A lot of things that just revolve around the student population in the area, and having a say-so in what's happening at that local level is really important.
Yeah, it definitely is. Moving on to kind of like a bigger topic of elections. So 2024 is a big year. We have the presidential election coming up. It's nearly a year away. We also have the governor of Indiana's election coming up, and your seat is also up for re-election the following November. Do you plan on rerunning?
Yes.
Okay.
I do.
That is great.
Yeah.
What is your campaign strategy or things you're hoping to really talk about leading up to the election?
Well, there are so many things.
Yeah.
You know, education is always a huge priority for me and how we're funding our education system, and that includes the college level. Over the years, Indiana has decreased funding towards public education, K through 12, and at higher institutions. So we only increase on average about 1% increases towards Purdue. So the ability for Purdue to maintain those tuitions and things could be directly impacted by that. But also at those lower levels, K through 12, making sure that our students are prepared for that next level in life, whether it's higher education or the workforce. So things like that are really important. But another enormous issue is public health and drug addiction, mental health, enormous issues that impact our local community, students, and the lack of resources.
Yeah, those are really important issues that I'm looking forward to hearing more about when closer to the election. So going into the Indiana General Assembly, which begins this January, what is your strategy going into it? You are part of the Democratic minority with a Republican very big majority. What is your strategy for just getting your the issues that you're passionate about heard on the floor?
Well, you know, we do a lot of work with, you know, both caucuses, trying to get legislation right. So that input could be anything from working on my own legislation to working on legislation that's being proposed. So we do a lot of work with those members across the aisle to make sure that that whatever we're passing is done correctly and the language is right, and we have the consequences we want to have versus the consequences that are not intended.
Yeah.
So that happens a lot.
Yeah. Are there any bills or legislature that you are hoping to see get passed specifically? Anything that you might be authoring, co-authoring, or just sponsoring in general?
Well, one important thing that I'm working on and have been working on for the past couple of years is safe housing, and making sure that tenants have rights, especially when it comes to safe housing, and the ability to address that with the health department, and making sure that things are fixed and that they are living in safe conditions. We've definitely had a lot of issues that have been highlighted recently in the media in our community, and those are just completely unacceptable.
Yeah, I will say my freshman year, so 2 years ago, I did live in Purdue Village, which was like considered COVID housing at that time, but it was definitely a very difficult living situation. So I do hope to see more housing or better housing implemented on our campus for sure would be really great. So what is your advice for students in getting civically, politically active on our campus? Anything related to voting, protesting, just learning more about the importance of politics in our current atmosphere?
Well, I feel like with the internet, it's almost inexcusable to not be able to become engaged. I highly recommend people look at the vote411.org site that the League of Women Voters does. All you have to do is put in your address, and it will give you everybody on your ballot. They do a lot of interviews, and so there's videos, there's surveys that the candidates have filled out to find out more information about those candidates. But you can also just Google people, find out who they are, where their stances are and things. You can look at voting records. There's a lot of sources online to show voting records. So there's so much information out there about the candidates that, you know, and number one, make sure that you're registered to vote. As a student, you're able to pick where you want to vote. But keep in mind that where you lay your head down at night is probably the area that's going to impact your life the most. So keep that in mind when you decide where you're going to vote, but make sure you're registered to vote.
Yeah, for sure. And the process is very simple. It takes about 5 minutes on any governmental website if you are interested. But just to wrap up this conversation, do you have any advice for students who are discouraged about voting, about our political system? It is so polarizing, and it can feel hard to kind of feel like your voice has an impact. So do you have any advice for people who might feel in this certain position?
Well, I think that is definitely an issue. I think the media tends to focus on those polarizing issues because the rest of what we do is pretty boring. But some of those things that we're doing are directly going to impact their lives. So don't be discouraged. Your vote is your voice, and please use it because it is so important. And don't get discouraged because you're probably thinking and feeling the same thing that everybody else do, but if you don't vote, your voice is not going to get heard.
Yeah, that's really, really great advice. Thank you so much. And thank you for being here, answering all my questions. It is so great to have you on our show. That is all for this edition of Watching Washington. We'll be back next week.